It was supposed to be routine. Burkina Faso's president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, arrived this morning at the East Africa Economic Partnership Summit, held inside the heavily guarded Kigali International Convention Center. The summit brought together dozens of African heads of state, high-level diplomats, and carefully vetted international press. Security was tight. Every entrance watched, every delegate badge scanned, every camera crew screened. Yet, something felt off. Our sources inside the summit confirm that one man, seen mingling near the West Corridor, stood out to at least one member of President Traoré's personal security detail. The man was dressed like a journalist, carried a local press badge, moved casually. But his eyes, they moved too often, too deliberately, and then he made a mistake. A small one. But enough. He stepped too close to a restricted hallway just as Traoré was about to pass through. He glanced over his shoulder, but not to look for someone. It was to signal. That silent move changed everything. Within moments, what began as just another summit shifted. Quietly. Dangerously. And no one, not even the cameras, knew what was unfolding yet. Until one man reached for his earpiece. At exactly 10:43 a.m., two men from the president's protective team broke formation. Calm but swift, they veered left, cutting through a small group of journalists gathered near the food corridor. The suspected individual didn't run. That was the first strange thing. He stood still, watched them approach, smiled faintly, like he knew something. But what happened next wasn't loud. There were no raised voices, no shouts, no visible struggle. One of the guards discreetly tapped the man on the arm. The other showed a small, dark badge. The man raised his hands slowly, said nothing. Then came the second strange thing. As the man was quietly led toward the glass exit doors near the media briefing room, a third person, unidentified, wearing a staff lanyard, walked by and slipped a folded card into a trash bin beside the water station. No one else noticed, but our source did, and they believe the two were connected. By now, those watching live coverage saw only a wide-angle summit feed. Delegates shaking hands, smiles, flags, the usual. But just behind the curtain, tension was rising. And President Traoré? He kept walking, never turned around, never broke stride, as if he already knew. Once the man was out of public view, he was escorted down a secure hallway, just steps from the main assembly hall. There, behind closed doors, an unusual protocol took place. Our sources confirmed that the man's press credentials were scanned. Once, twice, a third time. Each time, the system returned nothing. No name, no record, not even a flag. It was as if the badge had been created just hours earlier, then erased from the registry. Security staff looked at each other in silence. One of them reportedly whispered, "Not local. He's not one of ours." Meanwhile, a digital technician was brought in to review summit surveillance footage, and what they found was troubling. The man had entered through the East Security Gate, normally reserved for diplomatic media, but his name wasn't on the guest manifest. The QR code on his badge, valid only for one scan, after which it deactivated. By this time, word had reached Captain Traoré. But still, he said nothing. No public alarm, no statement. Just silence. Yet those closest to the president say his expression changed, just slightly. The last time it did was weeks before a major international arrest. And that's when people around him began to worry. As delegates returned to the conference hall for the second plenary session, few noticed the subtle shift in the air. President Traoré took his seat at the front, third row, center aisle, calm, still, watching. Meanwhile, behind the heavy soundproof doors of the operations corridor, security officials debated what to do with the man in custody. No phone, no wallet, no credentials that held up under scrutiny, just a plain notebook and a black pen, neither marked. And yet, the man spoke no word. According to an internal source, he requested no consular assistance. An unusual choice, considering protocol would demand immediate contact with his embassy, if indeed he belonged to one. But then came the moment that chilled several guards. One of them, a regional counterintelligence liaison, leaned in and whispered. He knew the president's route, even the unscheduled turns. A silence fell in that hallway. Not procedural, not bureaucratic, but personal. For many in the room, this wasn't just a breach. It felt like betrayal. And somewhere nearby, President Traoré remained motionless, hands folded, listening, as if he knew who was watching long before the rest of the world did. At exactly 11:26 a.m., something unexpected happened. The summit's internal data servers, responsible for media accreditation and entry logs, briefly went offline, only for 9 minutes, but just long enough for something to disappear. By the time systems came back up, the scan record of the man's badge was gone. Surveillance footage from entrance gate C, also missing. Staff dismissed it as a temporary sync issue, but a technician later admitted, off the record, that he saw someone rewrote files to an external drive just moments before the shutdown. That person? Not from Burkina Faso. Not from Africa. Worse, their name showed up on past contractor lists from 2 Western embassies. Still, no public alarms were raised. The event proceeded, cameras rolled, speeches resumed, but tension crackled beneath the marble floors of the venue. One delegate from Mali noticed it. She leaned toward a colleague and asked quietly, "Why is Traoré so calm?" The answer came not from the room, but from the guards outside it, who had just found something inside the suspect's pen. Not ink, not a hidden blade, but a high-frequency recording chip active. Security scanned the chip. It contained no voices, no video, just timed pulses, encrypted signals that analysts believe were transmitting location data, and possibly more. Worse still, when cross-referenced with internal logs, those pulses aligned with the movements of not only President Traoré, but also 5 African heads of state seated near him. It was a map, a live one, built in real time. That's when an assistant to the summit's event coordinator made a quiet confession. The suspect had asked just 1 hour earlier for a copy of the delegate seating chart. For media clarity, he said. She handed it over, unaware of the man's true purpose. Now she was trembling. One of the guards turned pale. "He knew our names," he muttered, "before we even introduced ourselves." Then, in the middle of that tight, air-conditioned corridor, the suspect finally spoke. One sentence. Calm. Measured. "I won't resist because you're already too late." He smiled, and that smile sent shivers through the men holding him. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. And behind the summit doors, Traoré remained quiet, waiting, watching, ready. By noon, most attending journalists were already preparing lunch coverage. Photos of leaders shaking hands were circulating. Headlines focused on development plans and unity. But behind the media wall, inside a sealed security chamber just 10 meters from the main stage, a silent standoff was underway. The man in custody had now been held for 58 minutes. Interrogators confirmed one fact: no embassy, no delegation, no agency had called to claim him. A senior official from an East African intelligence unit reviewed his fingerprints through Interpol. The result? Blocked. "Flagged but encrypted," one technician said. "That's military-grade masking." A second official asked quietly, "Military from where?" No one answered. Meanwhile, outside that small room, whispers began spreading among the presidential security teams of other nations. Was the summit safe? Was this man alone? Was the target only Traoré? Or was the entire bloc at risk? At 12:07 p.m., President Traoré stood, walked out of the plenary hall, said nothing to the press. He didn't need to, because by then, someone had slipped a small brown envelope under the table in front of him. Inside, a name, a country, a signature, and none of it belonged to Africa. Minutes later, President Traoré returned to the conference room. The next speaker, a European trade envoy, had just been introduced. He was tall, clean-shaven, well-dressed, known for his ties to international banking networks. As he stepped forward to the podium, Traoré moved toward him. Not fast, not threatening, but direct. The room fell silent. No translator, no protocol. Just 2 men, face to face. Traoré extended his hand. The envoy hesitated, then shook it. Cameras flashed. On the surface, it looked like diplomacy. But those watching closely saw something else. The slight tightening of Traoré's grip. The envoy's sudden swallow. The exact second when his smile faltered. Traoré leaned in, whispered just 4 words. No microphone caught them. But a delegate from Rwanda, seated nearby, would later recall one chilling detail. The envoy's knuckles turned white. Then, calmly, Traoré returned to his seat. Within minutes, the envoy announced he'd be withdrawing from afternoon discussions due to a family emergency. He exited quietly, alone. The envelope Traoré had received earlier, still unopened on the table beside him, but his message was clear. We know. At 12:31 p.m., the official summit livestream abruptly cut to black. No announcement, no glitch notice, just silence. The media center, packed with global correspondents, scrambled. Some assumed a technical failure. Others looked at each other, worried, especially when their Wi-Fi was disabled just seconds later. What few realized at the time was that the blackout wasn't accidental. Security logs now confirm that a senior Western delegate had issued an emergency communication request to remove all live media feeds until internal protocol reviews were completed. But the truth? They didn't want the next moments broadcasted. Inside the summit hall, 2 of Traoré's aides quietly approached a Nigerian official and handed over a micro SD card. No words exchanged. Across the room, the man in custody was being moved. Not through the front doors, not through security, but through a side hallway no one outside the African bloc had clearance to use. And still, no formal charges, no photos, no names. The world would soon see only edited footage. But in that quiet, windowless summit room, something irreversible had already begun. And Traoré had yet to speak a single word. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. Shortly after the press blackout began, a new protocol took effect. Summit staff received an internal directive labeled Level 4 Containment. Most didn't know what that meant. Those who did went silent. All hallway cameras were turned off. 3 wings of the convention center were sealed, and key organizers from Ethiopia, Guinea, and Burkina Faso were quietly pulled aside. No alarm was sounded, no announcement was made. The summit carried on, visibly, but underneath, there was a scramble. Then came the quiet order that drew concern from several attending African delegates. Delete all third-party footage not reviewed by internal monitors. What did that mean? It meant journalists would be asked, politely but firmly, to surrender memory cards. It meant phone cameras would be inspected, and it meant anything that hadn't been streamed live was now gone. But one delegate from Tanzania didn't comply. She had filmed a short clip earlier, just 19 seconds, showing the suspect being led away. By 1:12 p.m., that clip was uploaded through a private satellite link. By 1:14, it had already been flagged in Europe, but the footage was out, and suddenly, the story the world wasn't supposed to see began leaking. As the footage began circulating in private groups across Africa, foreign advisors inside the summit started receiving urgent phone calls. Phones rang without pause. Some left the room to take them. Others looked visibly shaken. One senior official from a Western embassy stepped out, then returned minutes later, face pale, eyes wide. He packed his papers without explanation, walked out, didn't return. Then, someone leaked a screenshot from his call log. It showed a number traced to a military base outside Brussels. Inside the summit, pressure mounted. Some Western partners demanded clarification. Who was the man? Was he in custody? Was he harmed? The response? Silence. Because by then, the African bloc had closed ranks. Not with anger, not with outrage, but with something far more unsettling: coordination. President Traoré remained seated, arms crossed, watching the room. A Ghanaian minister leaned in and whispered something. Traoré nodded. A moment later, a request was made to strike the next speaking item, an infrastructure panel led by European delegates. They declined to speak, and one Western camera operator was asked to leave. The tone had shifted. No longer just suspicion. Now, distrust. At 1:35 p.m., something unexpected happened. The same brown envelope that had been quietly slipped under President Traoré's table earlier in the day was handed back. This time, not sealed, but empty. A symbolic gesture. No words, just a subtle, intentional message. We read it. We rejected it. Those seated nearby noticed. So did one high-ranking European diplomat, who reportedly turned red-faced and abruptly left the conference hall. Inside the envelope had been a name, a signature, and a discreet offer. Sources say it proposed cooperation and de-escalation, likely an attempt to calm the growing fracture. But it was too late. The moment the name on that paper was linked to a NATO contractor in Djibouti, the mood shifted from cautious to cold. Traoré never raised his voice, never called for action. He didn't need to, because now the rest of the bloc was speaking on his behalf, and for the first time during the summit, applause broke out. Not for a speaker, not for a deal, but for a man who had been followed, and responded with silence louder than any speech. By early afternoon, the summit's second session was delayed, not by technical issues but by silence. Several European delegates had left the room. Others remained but refused to speak. They exchanged glances, whispered into earpieces, checked their watches. Behind them, African leaders sat still, unmoved. For the first time in years, no one from the West held the microphone, and then the moderator announced, "The floor is open." But no one stood up. Instead, an eerie stillness took hold. Cameras scanned the room. Reporters scribbled notes. President Traoré, still seated, still silent. But now, every eye was on him. One official from South Africa broke the tension, leaning into the microphone and saying, "Maybe silence is all we need today." Laughter didn't follow. Applause didn't come. Just nods. Quiet, respectful nods. It was clear the balance had shifted. And for the first time, those used to directing the conversation had nothing left to say. Later, as the press tried to exit, they were met by internal security and handed a revised schedule. No interviews, no panels, no press conferences. The narrative, once controlled by others, was now out of reach. At 2:14 p.m., a closed-door gathering of 7 African heads of state was held in the side briefing room of the convention center. No Western observers were invited. Sources close to the session confirmed what many feared. The man in custody had not acted alone. Recovered communication logs, accessed through a decrypted flash drive in his possession, revealed real-time messages sent to a contact code named Omega-4, believed to be linked to an intelligence unit operating under diplomatic cover. These messages included seating arrangements, timestamps, and phrases like, "Hold at perimeter, wait for nod." Officials present were stunned. And then, a short handwritten note from President Traoré was passed to the summit chair. It read only 4 words: "Let it be known." That sentence marked a shift. A joint communiqué was drafted on paper, not email. Each delegate signed it by hand. The statement was never read publicly, but its existence was confirmed by a Malian spokesperson. "We're done pretending." Back in the main hall, staff prepared for a final session. One stripped of ceremonies, stripped of photo ops. And Traoré? He remained where he'd been all day, watching, waiting. His silence was not weakness, it was strategy. As the summit neared its close, with most official photos scrubbed and media censored, one independent camera remained active, set up by a student volunteer from Senegal. It wasn't professional, no microphone, just a wide-angle feed capturing the room as it really was, raw, tense, exposed. At exactly 2:57 p.m., that camera recorded a subtle moment. A young protocol officer approached Traoré, knelt slightly and whispered, "They've left." She meant the diplomats, the ones who had arrived in black cars with long titles and carefully worded agendas. They had all exited quietly, before closing remarks. No handshakes, no goodbye statements. And just like that, the air changed. President Traoré finally stood. He said nothing. Walked slowly down the center aisle. Delegates rose to their feet, not out of obligation, but respect. One woman, an elder stateswoman from Chad, began to cry softly. Not from fear, but from something else. Vindication. Because what the world tried to erase had now been seen. What was meant to be buried had bloomed into something greater. The camera caught it all. Not the spy. Not the scandal. But a man, walking out. Having said nothing. And somehow, having said everything. After the summit quietly ended, with cameras packed and delegates dispersed, one recording slipped through. The students' wide-angle footage, captured on a budget lens without filters or cuts, was posted to a private community page that night. It showed the full room, the walkout, the handshake refusals, and most importantly, it showed what the mainstream feeds didn't. President Traoré pausing at the exit, turning once, just once. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. But his gaze swept across the emptying rows, then upward toward the flags that hung from the ceiling, symbols of nations both present and absent. For many watching online later, it wasn't a political moment. It was personal. A quiet recognition of a history long ignored. And then, in one final frame, the envelope, still on the desk, was left behind. Open. Empty. No words needed. Within 12 hours, that clip had been translated into 11 languages, and one line from a Senegalese broadcaster's voiceover would echo across radios and phones. They came with silence. He answered with dignity. Within 24 hours of the summit's close, major outlets had shifted focus. No mentions of the surveillance incident, no follow-up questions to the embassies involved. Instead, headlines focused on new trade opportunities and climate partnerships. The footage that leaked? Labeled unverified. Social media links? Removed. Some Western commentators called it misinformation. Others claimed Traoré's silence was calculated showmanship. But those who were in the room knew better. It wasn't performance. It was restraint. Behind closed doors, several African intelligence heads confirmed what had long been suspected but never proven. The man detained had no passport, no verifiable employment history, and a classified digital chip that matched NATO hardware. And yet, he was quietly flown out, without charge, without name, without a single official statement from his country of origin. No accountability. What was covered up wasn't the arrest. It was the respect Traoré earned that day. The calm, deliberate way he held his composure while others panicked. The story the world wasn't ready to hear was the strength of a man who didn't flinch. As the world looked away, millions across Africa leaned in. From roadside cafes to quiet village halls, they watched the grainy footage again and again. Not for entertainment, but for confirmation. That dignity is not weakness. That a president can rise without shouting. That a man can be followed, provoked, even betrayed, and still stand tall, say nothing, and walk out stronger than he entered. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not respond with retaliation. He didn't storm out. He didn't demand apologies. He just looked forward and kept walking. For many elders watching, it wasn't about espionage. It was about history. The kind written in silence, the kind that cannot be erased, no matter how hard the world tries. So, if this story moved you, remember this. Silence can carry power. Dignity can shift history. And truth, no matter how quietly it speaks, can still be heard. If this message touched you, don't let it end here. Share it, remember it, and keep listening for the voices the world tries to silence. This isn't just news, it's legacy.